Good evening and welcome to the second of two forums brought to you by Cayuga Community College and the Citizen, and that are broadcast on Spectrum, Verizon Fios, as well as ARMA, the Auburn Regional Media Access, as well as the college's radio station, WIN 89.9. I'm your moderator, Guy Costantino. On November 8th, voters across New York State and across the country will be electing members to Congress, but as well to about a third of the Senate. And in New York, all 63 Senate seats are up, as well as all 150 members of the Assembly. Cayuga County currently has 2 Assembly members, and because of the 2020 census, Cayuga County will now have 3 separate districts come January 1st. The 120th Assembly District, which is in the north part of Cayuga County, will be represented in January by Assembly Minority Leader Will Barkley, who has no opponent on November 8th. And the new 131st Assembly District that starts in Aurelius and Fleming and makes its way south along the western side of Cayuga County has 13 towns in the county, and it will be represented by the current Republican Assemblyman Jeff Callaghan, who also does not have an opponent. There is one race that is competitive in Cayuga County, and that leaves us with the new reconfigured 126th Assembly District that is currently represented by Assemblyman John Lemondes, who was elected in 2020 and is seeking re-election in a reconfigured district that includes the city of Auburn and the towns of Brutus, Cato, Conquest, Mentz, Owasco, Senate, and Troup, as well as some of the towns in Skaneateles that are covered by this station, including Skaneateles and Spafford. Assemblyman Lemondes is being challenged by Democrat Bruce MacBain. While the 2020 census resulted in new congressional and Senate and Assembly districts, a successful lawsuit this year will result in a redesign of districts for the Assembly for the 2024 elections next April, though those elections will occur in 2024. Tonight we do have both Assemblyman John Lemondes, a Republican and a conservative, and his challenger, Democrat Bruce MacBain, in the studio for the next hour. Also in the studio, who will be asking the questions as he has for about a decade and a half, is Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen. His paper was recently named by the Journalist Society of New York as a 2001 newspaper of distinction with a circulation of under $75,000. Congratulations on that. Our candidates are sitting in the order of their opening statements. They flipped a coin for who would go first. So we will hear from Assemblyman John Lemondes, who is on the Republican and conservative lines. Sir, welcome. You have 2 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Thank you to the students at CCC for running the cameras, and to Mr. Costantino and Mr. Boyer for moderating the debate, Mr. MacBain for the discourse. Good afternoon, fellow Central New Yorkers. As you know, there's a lot at stake in this election, and I want you to understand my commitment to you and your families to restore public safety and confidence, and to make it possible to give Central New Yorkers something to look forward to economically by reducing the out-of-control inflation. I have worked tirelessly to improve our economy and give people hope that they don't have to continue leaving our great state and community. But I need your help. My commitment to public service began with a 27-year military career where I served in both Iraq and Afghanistan and retired from honorably. And I now take great pride in serving you here in Onondaga and Cayuga counties for the last 2 years. My commitment to our law enforcement community will continue indefinitely. I will do everything possible to ensure they have the resources, respect, and backing they need to be successful for us all. Without public safety, we have nothing. My commitment to parents to get the indoctrination out of our schools and away from our children will not stop until complete. Last, I think I've demonstrated the strength, tenacity, fortitude, and cooperative spirit you expect from your legislators, and want you to know I would be honored again to continue serving you in the 126th Assembly District. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. We'll now hear from Bruce MacBain, who's on the Democratic line. Mr. MacBain, welcome to the studio.
Thank you. Thank you, Assemblyman Lemondes. Thank you, guys. Thank everybody that Assemblyman Lemondes. Thank you very much. I love this part of campaigning. There have been a few things that have not been so enjoyable, but a discourse, an exchange of ideas, I love this. When I was a kid, my mom, through our church, ran a summer program. And she brought me with her, and it was in a town next to ours for disadvantaged youth. And the kids were supposed to go home for lunch. And I noticed very quickly that the kids left the building, but they kind of hung around the building and they weren't going home. So I asked my mom, why aren't kids going home for lunch? And she said, well, not everybody has lunch to go home to. And she had to explain to me that, but also the goals of the program and what we could provide for these kids to make their summers better. And it's my first memory of seeing that there was an equality in life. And I didn't just see that. I saw through my mom that you do something about it. You fight against injustice. So I was raised to do that and to make our communities the best that they can be. I decided to do that through public education. I was a teacher for 10 years and then a middle school principal for 21 years. Built a very successful program. School won awards, teachers won awards. I won the New York State Middle School Principal of the Year award, and we really felt like we were having an effect on that community and making that the best it can be. So I retired last year, and I'm not done yet trying to make our communities better. So I am running for Assembly and hoping to bring my energy and experiences there.
Thank you, Mr. MacBain. Well, you'll now be questioned by Mr. Boyer over the next 45 to 55 minutes. Lexi, one of our students, is going to keep you on track with time. She'll hold up a sign at 1.5 minutes or in 2 minutes when time is up, and I will hopefully nudge you to end your soliloquy if you have not already. And then if there's a response you want to make after you've spoken and your opponent is speaking, we'll give you 1 minute rebuttals on that as well, and we'll go as long as that seems purposeful. Mr. Boyer, welcome back.
Okay, thank you. Thanks to both of you for taking part in this. I appreciate you making the time to come to the studio and do this, and we'll try to cover as many different issues as we can in the hour, little less than the hour that we have. I'd like to start by asking you to kind of put yourself in your should you win this election, and put yourself in Albany in your conferences and sort of how you would work with your leaders. The context being, the Assembly has a pretty strong Democratic advantage. It's very unlikely that would change in one election. So it'll be democratically controlled when you go back. And the question is kind of different for each of you. For Assemblyman Lemondes, for voters who feel like that's a disadvantage to our district. That we have a legislator who's not in the group, part of the group that has the power. What do you say to that, and why should they not factor that in, or why it shouldn't be a big factor in their decision? For you, Mr. MacBain, it's a question of, how can you convince voters you're not going to go to Albany and just be a rubber stamp for the Democratic majority? Were there specific things right now you can even point to that you would say, I don't agree with Speaker Heastie on this, and this. So, kind of the same question to each of you, framed from a different perspective, but I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
We'll start with the Assemblyman. You'll have 2 minutes, and then we'll turn to Mr. MacBain.
Thank you, Jeremy. So first, I want to start by disagreeing with the premise of your question. I am not in agreement that we are going to be outnumbered 2.5 to 1 at the end of this election. I think people have had enough in New York State. I think public safety matters incredibly to people. I think that inflation that's crippling our families matters incredibly to people. And I think that an awakening is coming, and it's going to come very loud and very clear on November 8th, a few days from now. Additionally, to answer your question, after rebutting the premise of it, we do a lot in the minority. Assuming we were to be, as a Republican, in the minority again, we force a lot of chapter amendments. We help with legislation a lot, and we impact the outcome considerably. If you notice, the Senate has 5% of their legislation is Republican sponsored. The Assembly doesn't operate that way. In committee, the Democrats, no matter how good the idea and how good it is for New Yorkers and Central New Yorkers, if a bill comes from a Republican, it is automatically held. That means it's killed in committee. And so this is a problem. I would almost reverse that premise and say, what will the Democrats do to recognize the good ideas from people that aren't like them and aren't from New York City? The New York City controlled representatives force a lot upon Central New Yorkers, and it is not good for Central New York. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. And Mr. MacBain, if you're elected and in the majority.
The reality is it will be a majority assembly. I've heard a couple jokes, I guess, of there's something more useless than a Republican in the Assembly than a screen door on a submarine. I heard somebody else say, if you know the term pork barrel, that's the money that an Assembly person can bring home to the district, that the Republicans don't even know where we keep the pork. Having said that, I don't expect that I'm going to be all, buddy-buddy with all of the Democratic leadership. I am somebody who questions. I am somebody who asks, who does this help? Who does this hurt? Jeremy, you asked me if I could come up with something specific. I think the HALT law needs to be looked at. Again, I'm hearing, that prison guards are, that the incidents there are up, and some people are saying those statistics aren't right. But we need to get to the bottom of that. And I'm a former building school principal. I believe in consequences for your actions. So I would not be a rubber stamp for the Democrats in the Assembly. I do not like how the casualness of money that was thrown around with the Buffalo Bills. And I want the Buffalo Bills to stay here too, but to give hundreds of millions of dollars to a billionaire. And it was so casual because we had just announced that we got about $500 million from the Native American casino shared revenue. And it was like, oh, don't worry about the 500 million because we got the 500 million. It's like, whoa, wait a minute, that's too fast for me in terms of spending people's hard-earned taxpayer money. So I would not be a rubber stamp in Albany.
Mr. Boyer.
All right, and then to kind of shift on to this year's ticket, you're both running, or this election includes a race for governor, and so I'd like you to. I guess I shouldn't ever make assumptions, but let's just assume you're gonna support your party's candidate. Tell us, in two parts, why you'll support, the candidate you'll support for governor, and what your concerns are for their opponent.
Mr. MacBain, you'll go first.
I will be voting for Governor Hochul. I am so impressed with how she acts, and she acts quickly. The Micron deal coming in here, you got to give her a ton of credit for that. And I'm so proud to finally have a Democrat from upstate New York representing us as governor in Albany. With Lee Zeldin, I have a list of things, but you lose me with denying the election. And he voted against the certification in Arizona and denies the election. And I don't know where you go from there. If we can't figure out that the presidential candidate that lost by 7 million votes really lost the election, and we don't want secretaries of state, from Arizona or Georgia to be able to overturn what the people wanted, you've lost me. Now we're talking about basic democracy.
Thank you, Mr. MacBain. Assemblyman Lemondes, who are you supporting in 10 days?
Thank you. I'll be supporting Congressman Zeldin, and I want to make sure everybody understands that I understand this debate and this race and the gubernatorial race in New York State are not about the presidential race that occurred 2 years ago. The two things have nothing in common. I will support Congressman Zeldin because he is organized, he's fair, he's got a great record, he understands and is close to the people of this state, much more so than Governor Hochul. Keep in mind, Governor Hochul has not been elected. Additionally, Governor Hochul, in my personal observation of her, is the most partisan person I have ever met in my life. I personally listened to her deny people, Republicans, their home state when she said, you Republicans should leave, just like Governor Cuomo did in 2014. This is not the standard or mark of a leader that understands what it takes to bring people together. New York State is hurting, and she additionally said she doesn't understand the importance of crime the other day in her debate with Lee Zeldin. If you don't understand the importance of crime and what's happened in this state, you should not be in elected office at any level. This is terrible. I understand the impacts of crime, bail reform, HALT Act, all of it. It is absolutely terrible for this to take place here, and for a sitting governor to pretend that the victims of these crimes who have suffered greatly don't matter is terrible.
Mr. Boyer.
Okay, and now we'll move on to a few specific issue pieces that really resonate with voters here in Cayuga County. I have a couple of questions related to agriculture and the environment. We'll start off with the agricultural industry, and specifically the farm overtime decision that was made recently to reduce the threshold that farm workers would be paid an overtime rate from 60 to 40. I'd like to get your thoughts on the appropriateness of that decision, and just in general, what you think of the original benchmark. I shouldn't say the original benchmark. 3 or 4 years ago, they passed a law that put a 60-hour threshold in. There used to be none. So is the 60 a number that you think we should stick with or could live with?
Okay. Assemblyman, you'll go first on this one.
Thank you. So let me put this in perspective for everyone. And Jeremy, I'm going to try to answer your question accurately. The 60-hour threshold was accepted by farmers. Most farms could make that work. And just to put this in play for everyone, this is a $6 billion industry. It's our state's #1 industry. The vote, quote unquote, from the Farm Labor Wage Board was a sham. It only had 3 people. 70% of the people that testified in those hearings were dead against this because of its destructive nature on farms and businesses. New York State is ranked dead last for outmigration. That's not a good metric to be measured by. This will force more businesses to leave. It will force more business consolidation. It will put people out of jobs, and it is not good for our state. The people that it's intended to help are the ones in every farm tour that I went on that want this the least. It will force workers to go to other states where they can get the hours that they want. This is terrible for New York. It's bad for farms. It's bad for businesses. It's bad for our economy. And it serves no purpose whatsoever. And it shows you what happens when New York City dominated politics makes laws and rulings. By the way, none of them were elected on the Farm Labor Wage Board that voted. When they make rulings that impact our state's #1 industry without adequate knowledge, you see what the outcomes are going to be. Bottom line, this will be very destructive to New York's farms. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Mr. MacBain, on this issue of the 60 to 40.
I have some experience in working on a small farm. My grandfather had a small farm in northern Jersey, so I worked 2 summers there. And he had a kennel, which helped supplement the income. So I have an idea of the hours of being on a small farm, and it doesn't matter what time it is. You need to be up when the dogs are up, and if it's good weather, you're outside for a long day. Having said that, our country is based on a 40-hour week, and I ask you, are you willing to be working 20 hours over the 40 hours with no overtime? The good part about this bill is it is gradual, and so it's not till 2024 that it goes down to 56 hours. It's not till 2026 that it goes down to 52 hours. So we will be able to track this, and I will absolutely be watching and listening to farmers to find out what the effects are as time goes on. In the meantime, the state will be subsidizing the farmers for any costs associated with the increased labor costs of the overtime.
Thank you, Mr. MacBain. And Assemblyman, you wanted to rebut.
Yes.
You have a minute.
Thank you. First of all, the 40-hour work week isn't applicable to agriculture. You might go a week or 10 days, and I know this because I own and operate a 516-acre farm with my family in this district. You might go 4, 5, 10 days without being able to do your scheduled work, and then you might have to work 80 hours a week to do the things that weather and that risk and that seasonal fluctuation prevented you from doing on the schedule that you had on paper. Agriculture is like no other industry, and it can't be treated like a factory 40-hour work week job. Consumer impacts, when my opponent says subsidizing farmers, As a farmer, I don't want that. That means all of your taxes are going to increase. The last thing New Yorkers need is more tax increases. That is one of the #1 identified drivers of outmigration in our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer.
All right, and kind of make the transition to an environmental issue, but keep it on the farm, so to speak. Here in Cayuga County and Owasco Lake, we recently completed the 9-element plan, which was a very in-depth, science-driven assessment of what's bringing extra phosphorus into the water, and the assessment was it's agricultural runoff is the biggest driver of that. The question with that information, what do you do? And I'm asking you as state legislators, what do you think the state needs to do to help confront that challenge of reducing agricultural phosphorus loading into Owasco Lake? The challenge, of course, being that the phosphorus is leading to all kinds of problems in the lake itself, harmful algal blooms and other quality issues. So how do we get that loading from farmland to decrease so it's not impacting the lake as much?
Okay, Mr. MacBain, you'll go first on this one.
We are so fortunate to be near Cornell Cooperative Extension and have their expertise in this for farmers. Clean water is so important, and the state government needs to be able to work with the farmers to attain this balance between the environment and clean water. And I know it's just a little bit outside the district, but Spruce Haven is a farm, Union Springs, I think, and they've been working with the government that they've got a system where they've got a biodigester, and I don't understand all of it. I don't know what a biogas is, but now it's actually turning into natural gas, and it's a win-win for everybody, where they're turning the cow manure eventually into natural gas. So we have a $4.1 billion Environmental Bond Act that's on the ballot. It is so important to pass that, and it's so important to have a state assembly person who can bring that money back to the district. Assemblyman Lemondes has a 34 rating from the League of Conservation Voters. That's very low compared to the other people in the Assembly, even some Republicans. And so I see the Environmental Bond Act as a possibility of bringing green jobs to central New York.
Thank you, Mr. MacBain. Mr. Assemblyman Lemondes, you have 2 minutes on this subject.
Thank you. First of all, you have to understand the linkage between algal blooms and sources. The notion that farms are the cause of all of our water problems is, #1, incorrect. And #2, what has to be looked at is all point sources together, not in isolation. This is something that takes a consolidated approach. It has to be scientifically driven, and it has to be looked at in time streams. You can't use 1 year's data only and make decisions. This single issue, the protection of our water, I don't think you're going to find anybody that doesn't understand how important that is. At least not in the Republican Party. We all understand how important that is and how cherished that resource is and how much we have to protect it. The Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act, all of these green initiatives are what is going to destroy New York State. New York State puts out 0.4% of world emissions. China puts out 29%. Even President Biden himself said that if China's not on board, none of this works. So as we strangle New York's economy and force people into heating and powering their homes and their businesses with immature technology that's not ready, that is driving costs through the roof, we're going to see that it just doesn't work.
Thank you. Mr. MacBain, you'll have 1 minute.
The technologies may be evolving, but we need to invest in these technologies. So as I was talking to the United Auto Workers, they're not even in favor of the batteries for electric cars. What they want to do is have us move toward hydrogen cells. we should be able to make, again, using the micron path as a path, to bring and invest in companies and make Central New York the hub of green energy jobs.
Assemblyman, you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. I appreciate that point. That brings me directly to one of my bills, 4935, which would direct the Department of Environmental Conservation to conduct a study on battery use and how to dispose of them properly. And the usage of the batteries to power the green movement has a lot of collateral damage associated with it that nobody takes into consideration on the left. Mainly the maiming and injuring of children in the mines that gather the cobalt that the batteries are made from. This is terrible. Our caucus, not the Democratic caucus, the Republican caucus, has railed against this to be sensible in the application of this technology because of the impact it is having on human lives right now, today, in another country that we can't see here and that our press doesn't cover. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lemondes. We'll hear from Mr. Boyer.
All right. Another issue that certainly has come up this year because of a Supreme Court decision is abortion. New York has laws that provide access to abortion. Some of those laws were even updated in the last couple of years. So I'd like to get both of your positions on, given what the Supreme Court is now saying, is that it's up to the states to decide about abortion access. What changes, if any, would you like to see in New York State's law?
Okay, I believe Mr. MacBain went first on the last one, so this will be the Assemblyman's turn.
As a pro-life person, recognizing that this issue is sanctified in the New York State Constitution, there's nothing that I'm going to do to change that. I don't think that that the Assembly or the Senate are going to change that. I voted against several of the bills that were put forth, and I think that making New York an abortion destination state is the wrong thing to do, and that's what's going to happen. Putting that aside, let's talk about the victims of crime. Let's talk about the people that work right here in Auburn in the prison every day that can't protect themselves while they're trying to protect you and I 24/7. Let's talk about the police officers on the street that can't protect themselves anymore, and all of the victims of all of the crimes of serial offenders that are not able to be jailed. Let's talk about the loss of judicial discretion, a judge's number one responsibility to determine public safety for the rest of us by assessing someone's risk to our communities. We have to take all of this into account, and we have to understand that public safety is our number one crisis in New York right now. Inflation is number two, and if we don't have public safety, we don't have anything. And we have a governor that just stated she doesn't understand why this is so important. Ladies and gentlemen, I do. I have a family. I have a daughter, just like thousands of you in this district and in this state. I want you to know I will do everything possible to protect us and to protect law enforcement, the entire law enforcement community, to enable them to do their jobs. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblyman. Mr. MacBain, on this issue of the Dobbs decision.
Republicans don't want to talk about this. I think we just saw that the Assemblyman spent about 10, 15 seconds on that issue and then segued into crime. The Dobbs decision is dangerous. I hope that New York State keeps it codified, but who knows who gets elected? Polls are pretty close for governor, so we have to keep fighting for the rights for women's reproductive health. The Dobbs decision, one, says that abortion goes back to the states, but in the concurrence, it goes further than that, and it lays out a blueprint for making birth control illegal and same-sex marriage illegal. And at first, I thought, what do I care? It's a concurring opinion, right? But then you start hear U.S. senators and state legislatures across the country talking about forbidding birth control. If you forbid birth control right after you forbid abortion, you might as well have women dressed as a handmaid's tale. We are subjugating women with that. But it's even a broader issue than that. It's women's health. You start making laws that restrict abortion, and doctors are not going to know whether they can what they can do when a woman's having a miscarriage. And there are millions of miscarriages that happen, and women need the doctor's help with that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. MacBain. Assemblyman, you'll have 1 minute as a rebuttal.
Thank you. The mischaracterization of the use of birth control and women's health in general, I take great offense to that. I am somebody that has 3 sisters, a ton of nieces, 2 daughters of my own, a wife, a mother, and I am not going to advocate against women's health. That is the most absurd thing that I've ever heard in my life. Ladies and gentlemen, we all have families, and I think that it's important to recognize that in taking care of our families, we have to do the right thing. And so women's health is here, and women's health will remain here in New York State. I'm not trying to remove and infringe upon women's health. Thank you.
Mr. MacBain, you'll have 1 minute.
It's similar to Lee Zeldin's answer, where he was asked about this, and he basically said, well, I can't change the law. The assembly is going to, be Democrat, as if, it's beyond his control. That forgets or that eliminates the possibility of what he's going to try and how things can change. I agree with the Assemblyman that the idea of eliminating birth control is absurd, but it is being talked about by Republicans in the U.S. Senate and in legislatures across the country.
Before we turn back to Mr. Boyer, we'd just like to let you know we're about halfway through our 126th Assembly District Forum. We have both candidates running for that post in the newly configured 126th, including Assemblyman John Lemondes, who's on the Republican and Conservative line, and then Bruce MacBain, who's on the Democratic line. They're being asked questions by Jeremy Boyer, the executive editor of The Citizen. Mr. Boyer.
All right. Two issues that are intertwined because they fall under crime. The bail reform, bail changes that were made in the last couple of years. A bill was passed to eliminate cash bail for a number of crimes. It was revised after some pushback, but it's still in place for I think all misdemeanors and several felony level offenses, nonviolent. So I'd like to get your thoughts on that. Do we still need to do more changes to the bail change laws that were put in place, and explain how you think that needs to be done?
Okay. I believe Mr. Lemondes did the first question, the question a minute ago, so we'll now hear from Mr. MacBain.
The bail situation was bad before. If you had money to pay bail, you paid bail and you got out. It was only if you couldn't pay for the bail that you stayed in prison until your case went to trial. So you could be innocent and staying in prison for months as your case went to trial if you did not have the money to pay for the bail. So something needed to be done. Jeremy, you asked earlier if there are things I disagree with the Democrats on. I think they went too far in the original bill in 2019, but it has been amended twice. And now that judges can take harm into account as they are figuring out what the bail should be, that is what will protect us. I mean, that's the goal, right, is to make us feel safe. And so if the judge thinks that the person accused would potentially do harm in the community, bail is set. It has no effect on our crime. There are no studies showing that it has increased crime. States that have no bail reform have similar, crime rates as we do. And if you really want to get into, how do you cut down crime? You have to fully fund the police, certainly, but you also have to get into fully funding schools, having after-school programs. You have to get into low-income housing, affordable housing. There are a whole bunch of other things that we've got to get into that really do affect crime, not bail reform.
Thank you, Mr. MacBain. Assemblyman, on this issue of bail reform.
Thank you. I couldn't disagree more. Bail reform and the tweaks that have been made to it were superficial adjustments. It has not gone far enough. I've been in the Auburn prison 3 times in the last year. We had a rally there a week and a half ago. Not a single Democrat showed up for support for law enforcement. Where were they? Where were they? This is a terrible state of affairs when our police officers, our corrections officers cannot do their jobs and they cannot keep us safe. They cannot keep themselves safe. They can't keep dangerous criminals off the street because there's no means of accountability for their actions. Let's talk to the children in Buffalo whose mother was killed right in front of them 2 weeks ago. Anybody want to argue that that guy should not have been locked up? Police couldn't keep him. So he came back and he killed his wife. Terrible, terrible situation. This is happening all over New York State. Look at what happened to Congressman Zeldin, attacked at a rally in Rochester. The gentleman that attacked him, now mind you, he's a sitting congressman. Just because he's running for governor doesn't change that. The gentleman that attacked him was out that evening or the next morning. This is not the society that we grew up in New York. Something terrible has changed and it needs to be reversed. Bail reform and all of the other adjustments to our legal and penal system have to be changed. Thank you.
Mr. MacBain, you'll have 1 minute.
Crime started to increase across this country in 2014. It increased steadily. It reaches a height in 2020. President of the United States, and it's actually Donald Trump. Do I blame him for that? No, it reached a height in 1920 because of the pandemic. My point is, we need to get to the other parts of crime. Again, there's no evidence showing that bail reform has increased crime, although it doesn't take more than 20 seconds of looking on TV to see all the Republican ads that want to make you think that. Republicans don't want to get into the causes of crime and how you can really prevent crime, which is more with programs like after-school programs and drug rehabilitation and things like that.
Okay. Assemblyman Lemondes, you'll have 1 minute as well.
This is not a theoretical issue to fool around with. This is our safety every day. I go back to the prison rally. The officer that was slashed from ear to face in the prison last year, that happened because he couldn't protect himself. I want every single New Yorker in this state to understand, especially those in this district, especially our patrol officers and corrections officers, that this is not a theoretical joke to fool around with. This is serious everyday business, and we have to take this seriously. Again, the adjustments the Democrats made, they know were not good enough. They didn't address the problem. Hence, we have our increase in crime in all of our cities and people getting slashed, stabbed, bludgeoned, robbed all over every day at rates that we've never seen before.
Right.
Unacceptable.
Mr. MacBain, I'll let you each go 1 more minute.
I don't need a minute. I just said the Assemblyman mentioned the word joke. I hope he's not insinuating I take this as a joke. I do not take this as a joke. I've already said how I think we need to relook at the halt laws, and I want police fully funded. I want the police to have all the resources they need.
Mr. Boyer.
All right. To shift to a little different topic, we are still, to some degree, dealing with COVID-19. This debate got pushed back because of COVID-19 related issue. People at home can look that up if they want, but in general, it's still out there. It's still circulating. We've had 4 people die in the past 2 weeks here in Cayuga County. With the winter coming, especially, and what we've seen now, unfortunately, in 2 winters, is the potential for spikes in cases. Should New York State, with the legislature and the governor, be open to bringing any restrictions back related to mask? Should there be a reinstatement of mask wearing, vaccine requirements, anything along those lines, if we see another spike threatening our hospital bed availability again this winter? Or should that now all be completely off the table given where we're at now and how long this has been going on?
Assemblyman, you'll have 2 minutes on this subject.
Thank you. I'm glad you asked that question. I spent a good part of my career developing biological sensors, and so I understand this at a level that most people don't. I would never rule out the use of any tool necessary based on our public health situation at that time. So I think it's a priori or premature to say what one might rule in or rule out. My overall comment on this is that I would not want to see the abuse of power that the governor used to extend this. And furthermore, I would not want to see a return to the horrendous action that Governor Cuomo took in killing, I don't know what the true number is, none of us know, 12,000, 15,000, 17,000. We've all heard the numbers of mostly our elderly patients, parents and grandparents in nursing homes. That was terrible. I don't want to see that. I think it was an absolute abuse of power and misuse of authority. So I think the right thing to do is to assess the situation at the time, leave that to the professionals, and hope that they are guided by honorable principles and will make the right decision on our behalf in that light. Thank you.
Mr. MacBain?
Masking shots save lives. Yes, we have had over 1 million people die. But the masking and the shots are saving, I don't know, but lots of lives. We need to be open, I think that was your question, to following the science. So if the science is telling us that we need to do some more things, then we need to do some more things. Coming from the public schools, I can tell you that I sure hope that closing down the schools is one of the last things we do. The effect, I don't know if you're going to have a question on education or not, but the effect on the schools was horrible. You know, we're just seeing how reading scores are down 5% and math scores are down 7%. And we learned a lot in schools about how to deal with the pandemic. So that, I hope, is the very last thing that happens in terms of what rules we might implement if things get worse.
Assemblyman, you'll have 1 minute.
Just for clarification, I would never endorse the closure of schools in the manner that it was done previously. I want to make sure, although I did not address that, I overarchingly addressed it, but I want to say it precisely. I think our children suffered immensely because of that, and that was the exact wrong thing to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Boyer?
I'd like to ask a question, it's probably two maybe, but in the gun control issue, because we've really had two major pieces of legislation in the last, I think, SAFE Act, I can't remember the exact year, but 6 years maybe. I think before you came, but when that was passed, it was in response to Sandy Hook, and now in response to the Supreme Court ruling on concealed carry, there was a new batch of laws passed in a special session this year. So I'd like to get, first of all, your thoughts on the SAFE Act, because we're now several years into that. Was that a good law? What changes, if any, should be made to it? So we'll start with that, and then we'll, I'm guessing if we fill the time with that, then we'll look at the concealed carry laws that were recently passed as well.
Okay, Mr. MacBain, I believe you're up first on the SAFE Act.
Gun deaths are the leading cause of death for kids, teens, people under 25. That's an incredible statistic. There's certainly Second Amendment rights. They are not absolute, just as the First Amendment rights are not absolute. You can't yell fire in a crowded movie theater. I think we can all agree we can't have tanks with artillery shells in terms of a right to bear arms. So there are limits that we should put on the Second Amendment. There are two areas that I concentrate on the most. I do not think that there should be military-style assault weapons allowed. The Buffalo Tops horrendous situation is a great example of that, where there's an officer there, Aaron Salter is there, and he's no match for the military-style assault weapon. Very courageous person. He gave his life to fight evil, I think was the quote, and I can bring a tear to my eye. So I do think that we should be banning some military-style assault weapons. I also believe that we need to have red flag laws. The Uvalde situation shows that guy is posting that guy, that people were calling him school shooter on social media, and we couldn't stop him from having guns. So to me, it's common sense to have red flag laws and limit military assault weapons.
Assemblyman, you'll have 2 minutes on this issue of the SAFE Act first.
Thank you. I believe in the Second Amendment. I'm an ardent supporter of the Second Amendment. I'm a lifelong outdoorsman and hunter. I'm a military veteran of 27 years. I've served in both Iraq and Afghanistan. And I want to make sure everyone understands that the SAFE Act didn't solve a single problem that New York State had. The SAFE Act made things worse. I personally am not afraid when people that are legal gun owners are able to carry their guns in public settings. The unconstitutional aspect of what just took place recently is a perfect example of how, on top of the SAFE Act, New York State is trying to infringe upon the Second Amendment in every way, shape, and form. I just bought, right here from Bass Pro Shops last week, a box of shotgun ammo to hunt ducks with. And it took me 30 minutes to get it registered, to show them my ID. I am not the person that these laws are after, yet they criminalize legal gun owners, legal shooters, legal sportsmen, and it's not the right thing to do. The aspect of school safety I want to address specifically. I just participated last night in the school safety task force, which is going on all over New York State in several locations. Central New York's event took place last night, and it is true that we do need to harden our schools more. We do need more money. We do need to be able to work together to identify people that may commit these crimes. The incident with the gentleman that did the shooting in Buffalo, they knew that he was a risk. Yet our system would not allow him to be apprehended prior to his departure for Buffalo. The same thing happened at the massacre at Fort Hood. Everybody that knew the individual knew that he was going to do something. They just couldn't identify exactly when and where. When they went back and asked the people that he worked with, every single one said, yes, this guy was a risk. You know why?
Thank you, Assemblyman. Need to keep everybody to 2 minutes.
Yes, thank you.
Mr. MacBain, you will have a minute. Something tells me Mr. Assemblyman Lemondes can finish his comment at that point. So, Mr. MacBain.
I'm glad it can take 30 minutes to get ammunition. I think that's exactly the point. Anybody that's in a rush to either get a gun or get ammunition, that's a problem. That often turns out to be a problem. The SAFE Act has worked enough so that New York State has the 5th best gun death rate in the whole country. It states, Hawaii is an outlier. Hawaii is number 1 in terms of being the best, but it states in the northeast of Connecticut, New Jersey, I can't remember the other one, in New York, that have gun laws like this that are having effect to the point where we're the lowest gun death rates in the country. The highest gun death rates are with the states controlled by Republicans who don't have these gun laws. It's Alabama, it's Mississippi, it's Missouri.
Okay, Assemblyman, you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. I couldn't disagree more. The gun violence in New York City alone is up significantly because criminals have access to weapons. If we don't recognize our open border with drugs flowing through every day, illegal aliens flowing through every day, weapons flowing through every day, if we don't recognize these things and stop them, we're never going to stop this aspect of public safety. The criminals will always have weapons. There's a pipeline for them. How do we stop that? We have to work together. But one of the things we have to do is recognize that it's happening and recognize that our open borders don't help this. Thank you.
Mr. Boyer.
And to get to the second part that I alluded to earlier, that on concealed carry, the Supreme Court said New York's longstanding law was unconstitutional. New York had one of the strictest restrictions on who can conceal carry a weapon. And in response, the legislature held a special session to pass a series of laws to limit that. So my question for both of you, I guess, is, how do you feel to the degree, should there be any limits whatsoever in where people can bring guns? How strict do we go, or how, with no restrictions do we go? Is there any limits on that that you think are appropriate? And you can frame it in the context of what was done here in the summer.
Okay. Assemblyman, you're up first.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for recognizing the unconstitutionality of that which was passed. That was a terrible infringement on all Second Amendment, on everyone's Second Amendment rights. And additionally, I want to answer your question directly. Do I personally think there should be limits on weapons in any way, shape, or form? I personally don't want to see weapons in church, with the exception of those officers that a church may have that are designated to carry them for protection. I think this is a indicator of our society, of what's happening, and I personally, to answer your question directly, would not want to see that. But the other aspect of that law which was passed so restricted legal gun owners that you essentially couldn't carry a legal firearm anywhere, almost anywhere. In business, the aspect of businesses having to post signs saying, right to carry is available here. I mean, nothing like making a business identify itself in a very odd way. I think that was wrong. I think some of the other restrictions are so invasive that it nearly makes hunting, shooting sports, transportation of weapons by legal gun owners nearly impossible. Thank you.
Mr. MacBain, you on the concealed carry decision?
The Supreme Court case is very specific. It overruled the requirement of someone needing to show cause to be concealed carry, but it did very clearly say that states can limit where, can also put some hurdles in front of in terms of things like red flag laws. Absolutely schools, I'm trying to answer your question of where, absolutely churches. I don't know if I have an exhausted list. I can tell you that, especially after that shooting at the Memorial Day parade, not here, in another part of the country, when I'm in crowds, I do worry a bit, and I make sure, I am so happy to see the police there, and I make sure I go up and thank them, like, hey, you make me feel safe. So I do not know the exhausted list, but I'd start with schools and churches, and I think would have to keep going down, like, whenever there's a crowd or whenever there's alcohol involved, I think is something that we should be looking at.
Mr. Lemondes, you'll have 1 minute.
Thank you. I just want to clarify that I don't think that students should be allowed to carry weapons in schools. I don't know what my opponent's perspective was on that when he mentioned schools. I don't think children wake up and desire to carry weapons to schools, but that obviously is a place there where they should not be, with the exception of those officers designated to carry them for the safety of the students and the faculty. And again, with the New York State School Safety Task Force, this is one of the issues we discussed last night. This is imperative to fund. As I said last night, if we don't treat our children properly and give them the resources they need to be safe and be competitive, what have we done as a society? We fail.
Mr. MacBain?
I don't know if I need to clarify. What I was talking about was older students, yes, but parents other people come into the building, and those should be gun-free zones.
Mr. Boyer, you have time for a 1 minute question.
No. Okay.
Or 1 minute response.
1 minute response.
Your question should be less than a minute.
It's probably impossible to have one, but we'll just throw it at you and you do your best. You both talked on and off throughout all these different kinds of questions at times about education. So I'd like to get your thoughts. I mean, after the pandemic, students have had lots of struggles, mental health struggles, academic struggles. I think everyone's trying to help them get back on track. So from a state legislature point of view, what do you think are the most important keys that the state can do to help get our schools back on their feet?
Okay, this is 1 minute, and we're not doing rebuttals because we have to go to closing statements. Mr. MacBain is our educator. Apparently, we're going to give you 1 minute to expound.
Yeah, that's impossible, but I'll take the 60 seconds. I am so glad that we're finally talking about this. I wish we had more time. The pandemic had horrible effects on schooling, and we're just starting to see the data come back that proves this. And I could have said, yeah, no kidding. We did the best we could. We need way more energy, money, talk about this, of how do we come back from the pandemic. You can't just send everybody back and say, oh, okay, things are fine. We need to get into social emotional education. We need to get into how are we going to catch these kids up? And we all know that it's got to go back to early childhood education. We've got to put more money there. We've got to put more emphasis on K through 3, because we all know that once you get to be in 3rd grade, if you're not on target for reading, your statistics are horribly off skew for the rest of your life. And it's not about CRT, which I know that Assemblyman Lemondes is co-sponsored a bill on. I think that's just distracting, to get into that.
Assemblyman, you'll have 1 minute on this issue of education.
Thank you. I am similarly glad that we raised this. I have been working with Dr. Timms and trying to figure out exactly what we should do. And again, this involves the professionals that understand this. And in putting together, in trying to put together a task force to solve this very problem, we all recognize, I especially do, we see the impacts. I see the impacts in my own family. We have to solve this problem, and I am committed to doing so, and want you all to know that I am not an educator, but my wife was for the bulk of her professional career, and she informs me quite a bit. And I think that her knowledge and experience is incredibly valuable as we go down this road, at least for me. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Boyer, for your questions. Thanks for doing these last 2 forums. We appreciate it. We're now going to have closing statements from both candidates. As we said, we flipped a coin earlier today, and Bruce MacBain on the Democratic line for the 126th Assembly District. You have 2 minutes for your closing.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you in the back again. Thank you, Assemblyman Lemondes, for the exchange of ideas. Again, this was awesome for me. I think there are moments in our history when things are going to happen that set the tone for the next 10, 15 years. And I think the elections of 2022 and 2024 are going to be that moment in time when we're going to figure out, are we a country that believes in elections, that it believes in democracy, that believes if you lose the count that you can't have somebody come in and overturn voters the vote. Are we going to be a country that protects women's reproductive health, or are we going to subjugate women to being a lower class of citizen? Are we going to believe in climate change and the effects of climate change, or are we going to just ignore it and get to the point of no return, where we won't even be able to to live on this planet? I have gone knocking doors. I think I'm over 1,500 now just by myself. Obviously, other people have done more than that. And I try to engage people in what the issues are, but very few of them even know who their assembly person is. And I find that interesting because he's been in office for a couple of years. And so I just want to promise to the voters out there, I will meet you where you are. I will be, holding, open forums and inviting you, or me coming, being back in the district, and I will be listening to you and representing all the people of the 126th district, and you will absolutely know who your assembly person is.
Thank you, Mr. MacBain. We'll now hear from Assemblyman John Lemondes, who's on the Republican and Conservative lines. Assemblyman, you have 2 minutes.
Thank you. Perhaps my opponent doesn't understand that the redistricting put several new towns in everyone's assembly district. at the last moment. In light of the serious ramifications of one-party rule in New York State, I urge you all to vote for those like myself who are not afraid to do the right thing on your behalf. Crime in New York State is out of control from the Democrats and their misguided bail reform. I will work to reverse this, as well as the sky-high, wrenching inflation that is devaluing everyone's savings and, simply put, making our lives terribly difficult. I will also work to get the politics out of our schools and away from our children. Additionally, illegal immigration must be stopped. Free payments of your money to illegals must be stopped. Help me deport them back to where they came from. There is a legal process to come here. Help me remind the Democrats of that by sending them home, not dumping them on us here in our communities. Moreover, the fentanyl war against our local communities, cities, and state must be stopped. Let's not pretend that it isn't happening and that 300 Americans a day aren't dying because of it. The reversal starts with strong, competent, honorable leaders willing to do the right thing. I can assure you the Democratic Party's idea of total control over our lives, our businesses, and the notion that individuals shouldn't be able to own private property is simply un-American and won't be tolerated. That doesn't work for me and my family, and I'm sure it doesn't work for you and yours. Last, you deserve leaders that will do right by you, that will reject this inflation, reject energy insecurity and the high prices that are killing us all, reject sexual indoctrination of our children, and reject defunding the police, and recognize that all lives matter. Please work with me to restore common sense and take back our New York.
Thank you, Assemblyman. We want to thank you both for not only being here in the studio and addressing your constituents or future constituents here, but also putting yourselves out there on the campaign trail. Not always an easy matter as it goes. We also want to thank you, our viewers, for tuning in to this 126th Assembly District Forum. We encourage you to go vote on November 8th, but you can start voting early this weekend. Early voting starts then. Remember to look at both sides of your ballot, because there are referendums, as has been mentioned, on the backside of ballots. This form will be up on the auburnpub.com website tomorrow morning. It'll also be on the Media at Cayuga website in a few moments. A quick programming note or two. We will be back to our regular programming on Tuesday. In the studios, we'll be on Inside Government, Auburn Superintendent of Schools Jeff Parazola, and Auburn Police Chief James Sladen. They will be here to discuss the recent arrest of students for threatening violence at the junior high, as well as school safety. And on Beyond the Front Page, we'll have the Gavin Center's Executive Director, Danielle Wright, as well as Community Liaison Bob Padula, to give an agency update, including discussing recent false rumors about their closing. In the meantime, we would love to have your ideas and questions for guests or ideas for questions. Please feel free to send them at cozguytho@aol.com. Until Tuesday, for Cayuga Community College and the Citizen, I'm Guy Cosentino. Have a good night and be safe.